Straight ahead today on Newsmax Now.
You live in the CIA, you live the CIA, you breathe the CIA, and now you will lead the CIA. Congratulations.
President Trump swearing in his choice to lead the CIA today. Meanwhile, the president and the old director of the CIA battling on Twitter about possible surveillance of the Trump campaign in 2016. Plus, what happened today at the White House when Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein and FBI Director Christopher Wray showed up. Also today, investors are liking the latest ceasefire between China and the U.S. as talks of a trade war seem to fade. We'll discuss the big announcement from the White House and what it means for Washington, Beijing, and Main Street. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo unveils the details of a new Iran deal, what it looks like, plus a key difference with this plan that would make it much stronger than the deal originally signed by the Obama administration. All that and more today on Newsmax Now. And hello and welcome to Newsmax Now. I'm John Bachman. We begin tonight with President Trump's demand for an investigation into America's top intelligence agencies. Today, Trump met with top U.S. intelligence officials, including Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats. After the meeting, the White House said the Justice Department will expand its Russia collusion investigation to include, quote, any irregularities involving FBI tactics on the Trump campaign. Yesterday, the DOJ said its Inspector General will look into whether the FBI engaged in politically motivated surveillance of the campaign. In a statement, Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein said, quote, if anyone did infiltrate or surveil participates in a presidential campaign for inappropriate purposes, we need to know about it and take appropriate action. Well, this all comes after President Trump sent this tweet out Sunday demanding the intelligence agencies intervene. Trump's comments followed multiple media reports that the FBI sent a secret informant to spy on the Trump campaign during the 2016 election. Well, earlier today, Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz offered his solution to get to the bottom of all this.
And the only way to get to the truth is an independent 9/11 type commission, and we have to prevent it from happening in the future. This election is a model of what should not happen in the future, and a special counsel is the worst way of getting to the truth.
Joining us tonight for the full hour to discuss this and much more, former Westchester County Executive Rob Astorino and TV host and author Michael Malice. Also with us for this part of the conversation, political commentator and Newsmax contributor Michael Reagan. All right, gentlemen, let's get started on the conversation. Well, first, we want to welcome in everybody else at home. If they want to weigh in, they can always do so. They can call us at 877-NEWSMAX. That number again, 877-NEWSMAX. Also available on Facebook and Twitter and NewsmaxTV.com for commentary. Well, Michael Reagan, let's start with you. Let's take a look at this Cambridge professor with deep ties to America and British intelligence agencies. He's now been outed as the person who may have snooped on the Trump campaign for the FBI. This is according to multiple media reports. Here's his picture. His name is Stephen Halper. He met Trump campaign advisors Carter Page and George Papadopoulos starting in the summer of 2016. What is your take on this revelation, and do you think the president reacted the right way?
Well, I think the president reacted exactly the way he should have. In fact, he might have brought U.S. Marshals with him and make sure that all the shredders at the FBI and Justice Department are covered so nobody can be shredding the next 24 to 48 hours. You know, I look at this and I think to myself, how much did the Brits play in this? Was there really collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia? Or is this a ruse to cover up the collusion between the Brits' MI6 with Halper and, of course, our FBI and our Department of Justice to undermine Donald Trump becoming president and then go forward after he wins to undermine his presidency? I think it's something that needs to be looked at.
All right, well, this morning, the president shared a quote from a former Secret Service agent, Dan Bongino, slamming John Brenner, the former director of the CIA. Here is some of what Bongino had to say on Fox News earlier today.
John Brennan's panicking, Steve. John Brennan has disgraced himself. He's disgraced the country. He's disgraced the intelligence community. He is the one man largely responsible for the destruction of Americans' faith in the intelligence community and in some people at the top of the FBI.
President Trump must have been watching, perhaps, or watching in the background. Trump loosely tweeted a quote from Bongino this morning. He went on to say that this is a political hit job started by Brennan, not an intelligence investigation. Rob, do you agree with the president's assessment here?
You know, this is kind of the deep state at work. When people say, what is the deep state? Here's what it is, in my estimation. You have, as Michael Reagan will tell you, with his dad was in charge. The president, whomever the president is in charge of the executive branch. and everybody reports to him through a chain of command. So to have his appointees, cabinet secretaries, push back, and the liberal media saying that there is a constitutional crisis potentially because the president is demanding something of one of his agencies is utterly insane. That is the definition of anarchy if we don't have a clear chain of command, and the president has the absolute authority to tell his Department of Justice through his Attorney General to do something. Obviously, it's got to be legal, but if he tells him to do something, if it's a policy issue, or he demands something, an internal investigation, what is the problem here? Especially if there are questions like this. This is serious stuff here. I mean, if we've got the government, through the investigative branch, the FBI, actually supplanting people to spy in a presidential campaign, that's really banana republic and dangerous stuff here. And I think the public has every right to find out whether there's even a hint of truth.
What about
Hold on one second, Michael, because I want to get to Michael Malice real quickly here. Michael Malice, former acting U.S. Attorney Sally Yates weighed in on this as well. And the president's demand, and here's what she had to say about it. Take a listen.
I think what we're seeing here is the president has just taken his all-out assault on the rule of law to a new level. Mm-hmm. And this time, he is ordering up an investigation of the investigators who are examining his own campaign. You know, that's really shocking.
Michael Malice, is it really shocking what President Trump did today, or is this just something President Trump has a different way of going about things? As we heard from Rob, there's the letter of the law, there's the spirit of the law. But what President Trump is asking for here is not necessarily against the law, right?
I mean, cry me a river, Sally Yates. I mean, I agree with everything Rob said. Remember, the Washington Post was so pompous and self-righteous that they changed their slogan to "Democracy dies in darkness." Now that President Trump, who was called a liar for saying that he was being spied on blatantly and explicitly by outlets such as CNN, now that he's saying, let's look at the bottom of this. Let's see if there actually was conspiring and collusion. And now, oh my goodness, the Constitution is being shredded. You know, if there's one thing the Founding Fathers wanted, it's that the FBI would be conspiring against presidential candidates. Is that really the argument we're being told here? Apparently so, and I think it's absurd on its face.
Well, I don't know if they envisioned the FBI back when they were writing the Constitution, but this is not what they were intending. Exactly. To have one political branch be able to spy on the next candidate. But we'll look for that IG's report. Michael Reagan, real quick to you before we switch topics.
Oh, you're asking me? No, I'm just going back.
You said you wanted to jump in there.
No, I wanted to jump in. Well, I mean, what do you think about what I was talking about, how the Brits were involved in this? And in fact, you know, they're the ones who, in fact, talked 6 days before the election. It'd be better off for Hillary to become president of the United States than for Donald Trump to become president of the United States as far as Britain was concerned. So I think we need to take a hard look at Britain and MI6 and say, how much were you into the deep state, in fact, working against Donald Trump? And as I said, is the Russia issue really a ruse at this point to cover up what was really going on between the Brits and our government?
You wonder how far this goes and if we'll ever get the real answers. Let's switch topics, gentlemen. I want to talk about House Speaker Paul Ryan real quickly. The Weekly Standard reports that some of the top Republicans in the House are trying to force Ryan out to clear the way for Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Now, under this plan, Ryan would step down as Speaker. It would be early, but he'd still finish out his term until January 2019. Here's what one GOP congressman had to say, quote, "We would have more success if there's no ambiguity as to what the leadership structure might look like. Everyone wants our A-team in place so we have the strongest outcome going into the election cycle." So, Michael Reagan, is Paul Ryan's time in the Speaker chair short?
You know, the Republicans just need one more thing to concern themselves with. And I don't know if this is really the direction to go. They need to get something done and move it forward. Are they blaming Ryan for things not getting done with the Farm Bill and what have you? Maybe so. But will things really change for the Republicans? The problem with the Republicans is they can't get together in a phone booth. Democrats get together and move forward. The Republicans just can't get together and find a way to move forward and get things done. There's still people out there talking about, you know, repeal and replace that hasn't happened yet. What is going to get done? What will they promise us will get done if indeed they replace Paul Ryan? And if they can't promise me something tangible, leave it the way it is.
Well, Rob, those in favor of this plan say it would have the added benefit of forcing Democrats to vote in a Speaker's race, too, either to cast a ballot against or for Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, putting them on the record and using that as ammunition during the midterms. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, it certainly would set that up, and you want to run on Nancy Pelosi, go right ahead. That's great for Republicans. But I think the moment that Speaker Ryan announced he wasn't running for re-election and then was going to step down at some point as Speaker, there's a power vacuum, and you're seeing that right now. And that was not good because now you have everyone jockeying, you have people trying to build coalitions, and he doesn't wield that gavel as strongly as he might have. I do think the next Speaker needs to be very strong, needs to make sure his caucus is whipped into shape, and that includes the Freedom Caucus. And they've got to be able to go as a block and do things, because right now we're our own worst enemy. We're getting nothing done.
Yeah, and I don't think the Freedom Caucus would like any kind of conceived plan that puts McCarthy in the Speaker's chair without a real vote taking place. We'll see what comes. Michael Reagan, thanks as always for your time. Michael Malice and Rob Astorino will stick around for us for the rest of the show. Coming up, new developments surrounding last month's Southwest Airlines crash, what the FAA knew before the accident, and how they failed to act before it was too late. We'll discuss that right after this short break. Stick around. And welcome back to Newsmax Now. I'm John Bachman. There are still a lot of questions surrounding last month's deadly Southwest flight, but we now know that the FAA issued warnings about a suspect engine part nearly 2 years ago that were ignored. That engine maker issued the warnings and said it was stepping up its inspection procedures after a similar but non-fatal accident occurred back in August of 2016. Investigators did not mandate those inspections and only acted after the passenger died in this more recent incident. Now, as a busy travel weekend approaches, many flyers are left wondering just how safe are their airplanes. Let's bring back our panel, Michael Malice and Rob Astorino. Michael, let me start with you. You know, this news is pretty disturbing, although I don't think surprising for a lot of folks. There are over 2,000 planes in the air at any given time. Passengers should be able to assume that their plane that they're getting on has been thoroughly inspected, but we're dealing with the FAA here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously no aviation expert, but this is kind of disturbing news. Whenever you have the government in charge of safety instead of the private market, there's really no accountability. A good example of this is food. Like, if people keep kosher, their food has to be held to a higher dietary standard, and there's a little label in every jar or bottle of food that you buy. But when it's something that's bureaucracy, you could just point fingers all day long, and no one ever gets held to account. Look at the IRS, for example. Lois Lerner and many others targeted conservative organizations. They blatantly destroyed evidence, and there's never been anyone who's had any problems as a consequence of this. And that's just dealing with money. This is people's lives. So it's very disturbing that the FAA has this kind of power when the airlines themselves would certainly be in a better position to guarantee the safety of their flyers and much more of an incentive to do so.
Yeah, I personally reached out to Southwest Airlines after the incident happened, and they assured us that all of their engines were going to be inspected. There was obviously a profit motive. If passengers don't feel like their planes are safe, they're not going to get on these planes. But there's a much bigger issue because the 737s, like the one you're seeing here, are so widely used around the world. Now, Rob, how come it seems, though, the subjects like this are never discussed unless something tragic happens? The original mandates were imposed 2 years ago. They were only put into place after this issue with Southwest came up. How come they were ignored?
Well, from now on, I'm obviously going on an aisle seat, not a window seat. But, you know, I think the FAA is just one big bureaucracy. And the airlines really have to take it upon themselves because, look, Southwest Airlines does not want this kind of publicity. This is not good for ticketing. So I think it's incumbent upon all of the airlines to make sure that they've got the best mechanics and inspectors, no matter what the FAA says or orders them to do. I mean, it's better for them to obviously have a safe flight. And also, you know, it's 1 in 11 million is your chances of dying in a plane crash. It's 1 in 5,000 that you're going to die in a car accident. So it's still very, very safe to fly.
That is an important point. It is much safer to fly statistically than it is to drive. As we mentioned, though, Memorial Day weekend is coming up, and if you're flying to a holiday destination, there are some things you can do to get more information about a plane you might be traveling on. A lot of the issues we hear about with planes have to do with the age of the aircraft. Most airliners, on average, are about 11 years old, but it would be worth it, or it would not be uncommon, rather, to find a plane that's perhaps 25 or 30 years old. The FAA suggests that passengers should go to an FAA registry or planespotters.net is one page where you can get a lot of relevant information about any plane you're going to travel on. The only thing you need, though, is the N number of the aircraft. And if you want to know how old your plane is, you can also go to airfleets.net or planespotters.net, a couple other options as well. All right, so Let's talk about China and trade a little bit. The president announced on Twitter this morning, guys, that China has agreed to buy massive amounts of additional farm and agricultural products, and that would be one of the best things to happen to our farmers in many years. Now, under a potential trade deal with China, they will purchase from great American farmers practically as much as our farmers can produce, adding that barriers and tariffs will come down for first time. Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says the U.S. is putting the trade war on China on hold.
We have agreed to put the tariffs on hold while we try to execute the framework. The president has been very clear since the first meeting with President Xi in Mar-a-Lago that we are going to reduce the trade deficit. We have an agreement with China that they will substantially agree to it. I would just comment that ultimately these are not government-to-government transactions. It's not a giant purchase order with us.
All right, the announcement comes after China said it would buy significantly more products made here in the U.S., including more farming and agricultural products, but Chinese officials have not said exactly how much they're going to buy. Michael, I'm excited about this. This should be good news for business. It will be a nice start for more Made in America labels going over to China, right? But it's the Chinese, on the other hand. Can we trust them?
I don't think we have any choice but to trust a nation that has 1 billion people and nuclear weapons. So it's either going to be trust them or, it's going to be a battle that's going to escalate to a very bad direction. I think we're also working with them very closely with the whole North Korea crisis situation. And I think President Trump and President Xi are actually working very well together behind the scenes and in front of the cameras. This is a relationship that could have gone very poorly. Trump campaigned very heavily on China, China, China. And now that he's in office, he's actually very much moderated his position, which I think is working to benefit both sides and, most importantly, the American population.
A little bit different tack than he took in his book, Time to Get Tough. Now, President Trump also took the opportunity to slam Democrats and former President Obama on Twitter for not doing anything on China, including the Chinese stealing American intellectual property. Now, Rob, there's this whole issue out there with ZTE. Is the president really holding China's feet to the fire when it comes to protecting American intellectual property?
Well, the unpredictability is a good thing right now. He put aside the sanctions. They're sitting there. The tariffs are sitting there, and we'll continue to talk. But, he's playing the long game, which is what's needed here in North Korea. We need China's assistance in this, and also with the economy and our goods and services. And so it all kind of comes together, but the personal relationship that he's building is a good one. And so, everyone gets caught up in the day-to-day things. Oh, he took it off the table now. He's losing leverage. No, what he's doing is continuing the conversation, and if it's true, if China is yielding and we've got more goods and services going there, that's great for our people in our country who are building things, who are making things, who are selling things, developing things, our agricultural industry. So, let's wait and see what the end result is before we start attacking him for, something that just happened today.
What would the Democratic pundits do if they didn't start attacking him right away,
it's
guys?
Crazy. I know. But give him a chance.
Give him a chance. I mean, maybe. We'll see if they can do that. Guys, we're going to play the long game a little bit. We're going to take a short commercial break. We've got much more of the show. That's the long game, when you guys come back for more of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk about the latest on the Santa Fe school shooting. Plus, Venezuela had a presidential election today, and the Obamas have new jobs, and they're coming to your TV screen. We'll have those stories plus more when we return right after the break. Welcome back to Newsmax. Now let's take a look at some stories making headlines around the country and around the world. New at Starbucks today, all guests will now be allowed to use the restrooms and just hang out in the stores without buying anything. This comes after the city of Philadelphia reached a 6-figure settlement with 2 black men who were arrested at a Starbucks last month after they were denied access to the restroom and then refused to leave. Critics say the new policy could effectively turn many of the Starbucks restrooms into homeless shelters. The Obamas are coming to Netflix. The former president and first lady have signed a production deal that will bring unscripted, scripted, and documentary series to the streaming service over the next few years. Former President Obama has reportedly told his associates that he does not intend to use the programming as a political platform. Good luck with that. Venezuela's socialist president Nicolas Maduro wins a second term. The country, once the richest in South America, is grappling with a collapsing economy. It also faces the threat of new sanctions from the U.S. Opponents have pointed to election, quote, irregularities. Maduro supposedly won 68% of the vote, more than 3 times the amount of his closest competitor. Authorities in Texas say there was a 25-minute shootout between the Santa Fe high school gunman and responding deputies. Investigators are now wondering if some of the victims could have been hit by crossfire. Officials say they're still waiting on autopsy results and security cameras inside the school to help piece together a definitive timeline. 10 people were killed when the 17-year-old shooter opened fire on his classmates and students and teachers as well last Friday. An incoming NRA spokesman, Oliver North, had this to say on Fox News Sunday yesterday.
The disease is youngsters who are steeped in a culture of violence. They've been drugged in many cases. Nearly all of these perpetrators are male, and they're young teenagers in most cases. And they've come through a culture where violence is commonplace. All we need to do is turn on a TV, go to a movie. If you look at what has happened to the young people, many of these young boys have been on Ritalin since they were in kindergarten.
Let's bring back our panel, Michael Malice and Rob Astorino. Oliver North's comments got a lot of attention. A lot of people felt like he was blaming something other than the shooter responsible. Michael, first to you, what do you make of the Colonel's comments?
Well, I think they're a little nonsensical. I mean, yes, Ritalin level prescriptions have been much higher than they have in the past, but the number of people who are on Ritalin who shoot up a school is statistically insignificant. The problem is that people are unarmed, they're unable to defend themselves, including high school kids, and that the left has made a culture where owning guns and having guns is stigmatized. The fact is you can't have guns portrayed in a positive or even morally neutral way on sitcoms or in movies. They've always got to be some kind of object of derision or fear. If we had a culture of gun proliferation where people are comfortable with guns and had access to them, these things would happen much less frequently. And by making schools gun-free zones, we're also saying these are defenseless zones, and this is pretty obvious to anyone who looks at the issue with a straight face.
Rob, hold on real quick because I want to get to a caller. Ian's calling in from Long Island. Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to say, that after Nicholas, after Sandy Hook, it should have been done, that cops are posted. These cops are trained to pick up on little things, like a person that talks too much. When they pull them over, they're hiding something. These little subtle things that people do. So here's a kid coming in with a heavy jacket in Texas with the shotgun, a heavy down jacket. I mean, these are typical giveaways. Cops should be posted until we can arm teachers and they can learn to be proficient and get a license and take courses. We need, whether it's ex-military men that are able to go, they don't have to think about it. It's a reaction. They just do it. Not like a deputy that hung outside with Nicholas Cruz trying to self-preservation for himself. You need people that hear the shots and they run to it. Those are people, and we need to be smart. We're the adults. We're the ones that pay the taxes that put the cops on the street. So I think every community would be very happy to know that two of those cops are sitting in front of the school, ingress and egress. You lock down the rest of the school, and you fortify it to a set. Every Democrat says we don't want a high-five Friday from a cops. They don't want any personal, interaction between their kids and cops. They don't want teachers with guns, but when a teacher can come in with a gun, if there's a person that's nuts, whether it's a teacher or a Nicholas, and they come in, there's nothing to stop them but another teacher with a gun, hopefully, or a cop with a gun. So we just got to smarten up, because the kids are the most precious resource we have. And if we're that dumb that we can't protect them, something's wrong.
That's absolutely true. Kids are our most precious resource. Ian, thanks for your call. Rob, last word to you before we go to commercial break.
Well, I don't know what their new definition of assault weapon is going to be, because this was a revolver and this was a shotgun, and a lot of damage was done by a deranged person. So, I don't know what the left's new message is going to be. I mean, we do have to get to, no matter what the Hollywood celebrities and singers say in speeches last night, yeah, we do want to do something, but we want to do something that actually will make a difference. And going after and identifying these people, that's the real issue here. It's not the gun or the gun of choice. It's going after the people and hardening our schools. I mean, you can't get into a government building anywhere without going into a fortress.
The metal detector, sure.
Same thing with the airports and everything. But our schools, no, we don't want. We want to keep it the gun-free zone. That's worked out pretty well so far.
I think you'll see some attitudes start to change on that one. Gentlemen, stick around. We got more to come. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo threatens the strongest sanctions in the history on Iran. And could President Trump's planned meeting with Kim Jong-un be a grand success or a diplomatic embarrassment? More with Michael Malice and Rob Astorino right after this. Stay tuned. All All right, we are going to talk about Mike Pompeo in just a second, but before we do that, we had one more caller we wanted to get to. Ralph is joining us on the phone from West Virginia and wanted to talk about these school shootings. Ralph, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. One of the things that we're always watching for is the gun factor. Everybody blames the guns. But in reality, going back when I was a kid, you know, I'm well over my 70s now, but we never had this problem. But then again, we had the Lord, you know, still existing in our educational system. And today everything is gone. There's no moral value. And the children love to watch kill videos, and everything is about destruction, movies. Anything we do, we hear about all this in D.C. and about our politicians not getting along, our politicians not getting anything done. And it always comes back to the point where the children are going astray because the parents are not involved anymore.
I believe the state law in Texas to own any of these weapons is 18. It appears the guns were not secured at the family's home, and parents do have a role to play in all this. Ralph, we appreciate your phone call. As always, we encourage other people to weigh in as well. We got to move on to the next topic, and obviously sticking around with us, Rob Astorino and Mike Malice here with us. Guys, Mike Pompeo gave his first big policy speech as Secretary of State today, where he laid out the Trump administration's demand to lift sanctions off of Iran. Take a look.
The sting of sanctions will be painful if the regime does not change its course from the unacceptable and unproductive path it has chosen to one that rejoins the League of Nations. These will indeed end up being the strongest sanctions in history when we are complete. The regime has been fighting all over the Middle East for years. After our sanctions come in force, it will be battling to keep its economy alive. Iran will be forced to make a choice. Either fight to keep its economy off life support at home or keep squandering precious wealth on fights abroad.
The Secretary of State says Iran must stop delivering ballistic missiles, release Americans who are being held prisoner in Iran, and stop supporting militant groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, terrorist groups in the Middle East and beyond. All right, Michael Malice, Rob Astorino. Mike Pompeo laid out a pretty clear case. Do you think those new sanctions, if they are in fact imposed, are going to be enough to bring Iran back to the negotiating table and get a better deal with that country?
I think part of it is the Frances of the world and the Germanys of the world and the Great Britons of the world have to put pressure on Iran to do so as well. I mean, they're sticking with the agreement. We're pulling out, as I think we should have. It never should have been signed. And it was weak in the fact that it never went to the Senate. Obama knew it wouldn't have passed the Senate because even Chuck Schumer, my senator here in New York, Chuck Schumer was opposed to it. But I do think that, you know, if you do put some pressure on them, I think it's very important that, you know, Iran will have to get choked off financially. And they know that the president will follow through. And that's going to be really important in something like this, to follow through. And the pressure, though, has to be from Europe as well. Otherwise, you know, if they're going to get supplies and money and everything else in roundabout ways, then they'll keep doing what they're doing, which is including provoking Israel by lobbing rockets in the Golan Heights.
Yeah, people might remember how hard it was for us to lean on Angela Merkel and to get her to sign off on those sanctions with Russia when they were invading Crimea. But Benjamin Netanyahu, he obviously loved Pompeo's speech today. He reacted. This is what he had to say.
We believe this is the right policy. We believe it's the only policy that can ultimately guarantee the security of the Middle East and peace in our region. And we call on all countries to follow America's lead here, because Iran is an aggressive force.
Now, Rob, as we were talking about, I'm sorry, Michael, as Rob was mentioning, you know, we have other countries involved in this P5+1 agreement, England, Germany, France, the others here. Of course, those countries want to do business with Iran still. They want these sanctions to be dropped so they can, you know, sell them things and do business with Iran. Are there economic interests outweighing the security interests here? Are they maybe being short-sighted in this?
Well, and it's also tricky if you look at the Cuba situation, for example. For decades, we had very strong sanctions against them, but that didn't get the Castros out of power. Further, when you have a nation like Iran, which literally calls us the Great Satan, if there's any suffering that happens as a consequence of the people, the leaders of Iran can point to us and say, you're suffering because of the Americans. That's going to encourage them, if anything, to double down. And finally, if they were to back down and go back to the negotiating table due to sanctions, that would make them look very weak. So that would kind of lower their hand on a domestic level as well. So this is a very tricky rope, tightrope to cross, especially with the case where we're dealing with people like Angela Merkel, who is hardly eye to eye with President Trump on this issue, or any other for that matter.
Yeah, legitimacy is a huge issue. All right, let's talk about North Korea as well. We hinted on this when we were talking about the China trade issue before, but President Trump on Twitter this morning urging North Korea's largest trade partner, China, to be strong and tight on the North Korean border until the deal is complete. Adding to that, the world has recently that border has become much more porous and has been filtering in, and more has been filtering in. I want this to happen and North Korea to be very successful, but only after signing. The deal, of course, is the peace deal that he was supposed to sign in a few weeks with Kim Jong-un. That meeting still planned for June 12th in Singapore. This will be the first face-to-face meeting between a U.S. president and a North Korean leader. Michael, do you think this meeting is actually going to take place?
Yeah, I mean, North Korea is my beat. This meeting almost certainly will take place, but I will certainly take a little bit of exception with what President Trump said, because that border between North Korea and China, the Tumen River, which is a very shallow river, is a mechanism for people to escape North Korea and get some sense of freedom. And it's been one of the biggest mechanisms for getting information into North Korea. They obviously can't go from South Korea to North Korea because the DMZ is the most militarized border on earth. But as people go to China and trade, often bribing the border guards in the process, that's how they're learning more and more about what the outside world is like. And the North Korean government has had to change their propaganda accordingly. It used to be the case that North Korea claimed that the world envied us and that they were a very wealthy country. Now they admit that they're poor relative to other nations. And it's all well and good if you tell your population that Kim Jong-un can walk on water and is the greatest person who ever lived. It's not that easy to convince them that being hungry is a good thing.
He also can make 8 holes in one golf match, too, which is impressive.
That's
by anybody's standards,
right? Of a myth.
Well,
yeah.
Rob, the New York Times had an article that said President Trump was worried that his meeting with Kim would be a political embarrassment, and that he was asking his aides and allies whether he should go ahead with it. Maybe has the White House been a little bit too premature with some of these promises of denuclearized Korea and the Nobel Peace Prize? Do they maybe get ahead of themselves a little bit?
Well, I think the Nobel Peace Prize will go to him if they actually do sign an agreement, but that's not what they're being pushing.
That's a big if.
That's a big if, but I don't think they're pushing that, not that angle from the White House. But I do think, again, the long game here, they've been setting it up, and if it doesn't work, then he should do what Reagan did in Reykjavik. Turn around and walk away, and maybe sets up a second summit where it actually does get done. But you can't show weakness, and you've got to go in with strength, and I think we do have a lot of strength going into this. And I think Kim Jong-un does want something to be done here, because I think he's realizing, as Michael said, people are hungry, whether he cares or not, but there's a lot of things he'd like to get done, including respect internationally, and this is something that he could, if, as a diplomat, if he can sign an agreement that would be verifiable from our end. But I think, you know what, there's a lot of upside here, and it would be silly, and hopefully it doesn't happen that June 12th comes and goes and they're not meeting.
We'll see. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us here today. We got that pivotal meeting between President Trump and President Moon tomorrow. We'll see what happens there. Look forward to having you both back real soon. Rob Astorino and Michael Malice. Well, coming up, do you ever wonder how Google got so big? What the real company Alphabet is really up to? We'll ask that question to an expert right after this.
You think Google's a monopoly?
Oh, yes, of course, Google's a monopoly. In fact, they're a monopoly in several markets. They're a monopoly in search. They're a monopoly in search advertising.
They know who you are, where you are, what you just bought, what you might want to buy. And so if I'm an advertiser and I say, I want 24-year-old women in Nashville, Tennessee, who drive trucks and drink bourbon, I can do that on Google.
It's amazing. Welcome back to Newsmax Now. That was part of a 60 Minutes report on the power of Google, a company whose critics say it's stifled competition. And it comes at a time when the public seems to have a heightened sense of concern over the power of tech giants. Well, today, Google and its parent company, Alphabet, are worth more than $750 billion. And since 2004, the tech giant has acquired more than 200 companies, expanding its reach across the internet. However, in a written response to CBS News, Google denied it was a monopoly, saying, quote, "Our responsibility is to deliver the best results possible to our users, not specific placements for sites within our results. We understand that those sites whose ranking falls will be unhappy and may complain publicly." Well, joining me now to discuss this further is the CEO of the Terranzano Group, Rich Terranzano. He's also the author of Digital Assassination: Protecting Your Reputation, Brand, or Business Against Online Attacks. Rich, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, John. Thanks for having me.
All right, you think you're seeing a theme. We're going to talk about this more. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin weighed in on this in Alphabet and Google earlier today on CNBC. Here he is. Take a listen.
Obviously, as these technology companies have a greater and greater impact on the economy, I think that you have to look at the power they have, and it's something that the Justice Department, I hope, takes a serious look at.
All right, so kind of a non-answer there. But last week we talked about Amazon and how they were dubbed the, quote, elephant in the antitrust room by the New York Times. Last summer, the European Union leveled a record $2.7 billion fine against Google for depriving certain companies in search queries. Of course, Google denies all this. But, Rich, why has the U.S. not gotten more involved in this antitrust type of legislation against Google like the European Union has?
I think that the United States is quite behind the eight ball on this. They're playing catch-up ball to what's going on in Europe and some of the privacy acts and others. These are homegrown, successful, large American giant corporations. And unfortunately, the technology has gotten ahead of the communication. And what I mean by that is, while we have this great technology, Google is easy to use, it's effortless. They probably had close to 200 acquisitions in the last couple of years, including Android and YouTube. They've been brilliant, really brilliant in collecting and using data to deliver the best customer experience to customers in business. If you take a triangle and you put the customer experience at the top and you put data mining on one side and advancing AI on the other side, that's what they've been doing. The problem is there's been a disconnect. While we want the luxury of that personal experience, of that personal ads coming right to us, whether it be for essentials or clothing or whatever we're buying, there's been a disconnect. People are concerned, are real concerned about the privacy of these companies. And that's because the technology has gotten in front of the communications. If I were advising these companies today, I'd be saying you got to do much more today than you've been doing with your customer communications. We saw that a couple of weeks ago come out of the Facebook testimony before Congress. Zuckerberg is testifying, I believe, tomorrow or sometime this week before the EU. So we're going to see more of this. But I think these companies have been homegrown, successful, created jobs, moved technology forward. And I think over the last 8 or 10 years, I think most administrations have looked the other way. We're getting into a public debate on this now, and I think that's a healthy thing. I think we have to be careful about what we do, but I think a public debate about everyone's privacy is a good thing. Remember, you can opt out of many of these things if you choose to, but then you lose some of the advertising ability to be personalized.
Now, is Google too big to regulate, Rich?
You know, that's a good question, and I think whenever you have no oversight, and there has not been a lot of government oversight in this area in the last decade, technology is just going to advance, and the communications with customers doesn't advance as quickly. We do need a public discussion about this. I don't think it's too large to fail, whether it be Amazon or Google or Facebook or any of the giants. Let's look at what happened to Intel. You'll remember just early this year, Intel had a chip problem, which they had known about it for months. They had the same problem back in 1994. And they didn't tell anyone about it right away. Yeah. So I think there's cultural issues in Silicon Valley that the technology is terrific, but the communication, the transparency is not where it needs to be.
All right, well, we'll see. We'll look forward to more communication from Google, hopefully, and more options for consumers as well. Rich Terenzano, it's always great to see you. Thanks for coming in, sir.
John, good to see you. Thank you very much for having me.
Our pleasure. Now, coming up, 30 million people tuned in this weekend to watch the royal wedding. In case you missed it, we'll give you a recap, some of the most memorable moments, or at least some of the pictures. Stay tuned.
Private Doss does not believe in violence. Do not look to him to save you on the battlefield.
I don't think this is a question of religion. I think this is cowardice.
I fell in love with you because you weren't like anyone else. You're saying you could go to prison.
But I don't know how I'm gonna live with myself if I don't stay true to what I believe.
With the world so set on tearing itself apart, doesn't seem like such a bad thing to me to want to put a little bit of it back together.
Ooh, that was just a little bit of the trailer for Hacksaw Ridge, one of the movies on Newsmax.com's list of the top 15 Christian movies in recent history. Other movies include The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and The Blind Side. You can see the full list by going to Newsmax.com right now. Lots of good stuff on there. And now to a follow-up on the royal wedding. Did you watch? Well, today the Duke and Duchess of Sussex officially released their photos from their wedding. They're also known as Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, of course. It was a lovely affair and cost an estimated $45 million, which, by the way, is about half of what Princess Diana and Prince Charles' wedding cost. That, of course, adjusted for inflation. But this was my favorite picture of the royal wedding. Sunday, the St. Joseph's Hospital in London put this up on their Facebook page and reads, quote, "Today we got a very special delivery. Beautiful bouquets made from the royal wedding flowers, which we gave to our patients. A big thank you to Harry and Meghan and florist Philippa Craddock." Great picture there. Thanks for watching this edition of Newsmax Now. We hope you can tune in tomorrow. Stay tuned to Newsmax TV, and you can always stay connected at Newsmax.com. We'll see you tomorrow.